Many jewelry students, when they hear the word hinges, have a look of fear and dread in their eyes. That is understandable because they have heard stories of major failures and complicated construction processes when making hinges for jewelry. In this video, I will show you techniques and tricks that will put those fears and dreads to rest. I will construct 2 knuckle hinges using 2 different methods that will help you make successful hinges every time. Then we'll take a look at some examples of different styles of hinges that can make your jewelry designs more flexible, more comfortable, and more unique. I'm Greg Greenwood. Welcome to my studio. Let's get started. This is a knuckle hinge. We all are familiar with door hinges that use this design. It is constructed using tubing cut into 3 pieces, sheet metal attached to the tubes, and a pin to hold it all in line together. This hinge has the sheet metal attached to the bottom or back of the tubing. This hinge has the sheet metal attached to the middle of the tubing. The difference between these 2 designs is the tubing profile and range of movement. The one with the sheet attached to the bottom has a high profile and shows off the tubing more, but has a lesser range of movement. The one with the sheet attached to the middle has a low profile, hiding the tubing more, but has a greater range of movement. Your jewelry design will determine which profile and range of moving that is best for your project. Let's start building the 2 knuckle hinges using 2 different methods. The first method is the bridge method. I can put the sheet metal either on the bottom of the tube or in the middle, like our hinged examples. For this bridge method, I'll put the sheet on the bottom of the tubes. For the second method, I'll put the sheet in the middle of the tubes so you can see the difference. First, we have to decide the width of the hinge. Our example will be 30 millimeters. Cut the 2 pieces of sheet silver to 30 millimeters. File the edges that fit together at a 45-degree angle. You can use a miter vise, flat nose pliers, a file on the edge of your bench pin. This will give the solder joint the maximum touch for a strong solder joint. Cut the tubing a little longer than the width of the hinge. In our example, we'll cut it about 34 millimeters. Find and mark the middle of the tubing and measure out from the middle point 5 millimeters each way and mark it. For our example, this will equal 10 millimeters. There are no rules for the length of the pieces of tubing, but I have found that if the middle tube is equal to or larger than the end tubes, then the hinge will be the strongest. Place the tube in the tube cutting jig or the bench pin. Cut 1/2 way through the tubing at the marks. Now cut a line lengthwise down the middle of the tube to make a notch. This is one of the few times that I can recommend that you take your jeweler saw and turn it at an angle to the bench. I want to stop here and tell you the secret or golden rule for making a successful, smooth working hinge. The 2 outside tubes must be perfectly aligned with each other. If they are not, the hinge will not work. So many jewelers just lay the individual tubes against the sheet metal and hope everything will line up and work. This is a waste of your valuable time and expense. If we use the bridge method and solder the outside tubes onto the sheet metal in a 1-piece unit, then the tubes will automatically be in perfect alignment. The sheet silver for this hinge will be soldered on the bottom of the tube. It would be easy to set up the sheet and tube flat on the soldering block, but it would be difficult to place the pallions to solder and heat evenly. I like to place the tube on the soldering block, then raise the sheet up to the height of the tubing. I've cut copper spacers at different thicknesses so I can mix and match the thicknesses to match the height of the tube. You can use any pieces of copper as spacers, but I've drilled holes in the spacers so I can pin down the whole setup so it doesn't move during soldering. Flux and place solder on both solder joints and heat evenly. After pickling, cut off the bridge and file the ends of the tubing flat with a safety edge file. The safety edge will prevent the sheet metal from being filed. Now we are ready to measure and cut the middle tube. Because the two outside tubes are soldered firmly, we can get an accurate measurement for the middle tube. Cut and file the tube to fit the gap. Make sure it is not a sloppy fit. Now we can solder on the middle tube to the other piece of sheet silver. Measure the middle of the sheet and tube and set up to fit. Solder the tube onto the sheet. Insert a pin to check the alignment. Because the two outside tubes were in line, the hinge will work perfectly. The second method to build a knuckle hinge is the graphite method. Remember the golden rule to make a successful working hinge. The two outside tubes must be perfectly aligned with each other. How can we do this and not use the bridge method? We can put some kind of a pin in the tubes to line them up. Sounds good, but if we use a silver or steel pin, the solder will flow onto the pin and be soldered inside the tube. Not a good idea. Here is our answer: graphite. I like to use mechanical pencil lead. It is perfect because solder will not stick to it, and we can use multiple pieces to fill the inside of any size tubing for a snug fit. For the graphite method, I'm going to solder the sheet to the middle of the tube. To make sure that we have maximum fit to the solder joint, we can either file the sheet with a joint round edge file to give the edge a concave profile to fit the curve of the tube, or file a flat edge onto the tube to fit the profile of the sheet. Here I have the hinge set up using the copper spacers and the graphite rods, which hold the outside tubes perfectly aligned with each other. Because the tubes are perfectly aligned, I can solder the tubes to the sheet with confidence. I'll measure, cut, and solder the middle tube exactly the same way as the bridge method, except I'll solder the sheet to the middle of the tube. Again, the hinge works perfectly because we followed our golden rule of hinges. Now that we have perfectly aligned tubes and smooth working hinges, how do we hold the hinges together? There are two basic pin styles: solid wire and tube. Both of these styles are treated like rivets. We simply mushroom the ends of the solid pins and flare the ends of the tube pins. To mushroom the wire pin, use a chasing or ball peen hammer. I like to use a spacer at the bottom so I don't smash the hinge sheet. After the initial mushrooming, use a planishing hammer to smooth both ends of the pin. This will tighten the pin into position. To flare the tube pin, use a dapping tool or repoussé tool. I'm holding the hinge in position with a ring clamp so I can use both hands. After flaring both ends of the pin, use a larger dapping tool to flare more. When you are satisfied with the amount of flare, even the ends with a planishing hammer. This will result in a nice, smooth, and tight-fitting tube pin. Knuckle hinges are only the beginning of the creative world of hinges. My definition of hinge is any mechanical device that gives your jewelry designs flexibility. That being said, let's take a look at some fun examples of hinges that are not knuckle hinges. This is where you can become extremely creative with your project designs. I flattened silver wires and curled the wires back onto themselves to create the hinge. Gives a nice linear look. Coiled round wires create this hinge. One-half round wires create this hinge. Notice a tube has been used as the pin. Here's a simple hinge made with a balled silver wire. There is a silver washer between the two forged wires. This copper hinge is made by cutting tabs into the sheet and curling the tabs back onto themselves. Using a series of jump rings, create this copper and silver hinge. A silver wire open spiral make this hinge. Cut square holes and tabs make this hinge. The hole and tab method has many possibilities for creative hinges. 5 alternating forged silver wires and tube pin make up this hinge for a total design piece. Could be used as a pendant or part of a bracelet. I hope these two methods of making knuckle hinges have made you feel much more comfortable in making hinges for your jewelry projects. I hope the examples have given you some inspiration to do something different with hinges for your jewelry projects. I'd like to invite you to visit my jewelry website, greggreenwoodjewelry.com. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of the new videos. I'm Greg Greenwood. I'll see you next time.